Episode 31, Let Me Stay. I'm going to need to go home and visit my family, Lucia told Cole after she changed out of the soiled jumpsuit and into the clean linen shirt that he lent her. Lucia didn't know what was so urgent, but her dad had called her just after Macy left. He told her to be home that night so they could all talk as a family. Lucia typically visited her family once a week, but she'd missed last week since she was in the middle of figuring out what it meant to be married to Dalen. Lucia didn't really want to go home. She knew she'd have to face Barbara and Macy's fake faces, but if she didn't go back now, that would just make them more suspicious, right? Thus, Lucia called the mansion to inform Dalen that she'd be visiting her parents' house that evening. Before she even knocked on the door, she heard her father and Barbara talking. Her father's voice was dominating the conversation. Dalen is a man who controls. He cannot be ordered around. No one actually knows how deep his influence runs, but rumor has it that he keeps both his power and his stealth intact through merciless means. With his status, he could have any woman that he wants, and I'm sure that any woman in the country would happily agree to marry him. The possibility of him agreeing to marry Macy is below zero. Barbara replied, "That's what I told her, but she's just so stubborn. When she saw Dalen at the party, she became obsessed to the point of delusion. Why don't you try to talk her out of this crazy idea?" Pretending she hadn't just heard most of their conversation. Her father leaned back on the sofa. "Why didn't you call me back?" He seemed to be angry, even though Lucia had shown up exactly on time. Lucia patted the back of her dad's hand. "Don't be angry. I'm here, so let's just all get along." Her dad's face twitched. "What happened to your ring?" "Dad, I heard Lucia's classmates say that she bought it from a knockoff store," Macy said, looking at Lucia with disdain. "Then why would Dalen say it's authentic?" her dad asked. "How would I know?" Lucia said, pretending to be disinterested. Mr. Elrod concluded that it must have been a misunderstanding. As they were eating, a cell phone in the living room rang. It was Lucia's. Apologizing for the interruption, she left the table to answer it. She grabbed the phone out of her shoulder bag, and the caller ID showed it was an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Who is this?" "Where are you?" Her spine shuddered as her mind registered Dalen's voice. Lucia's heart skipped a beat. She looked into the dining room and went outside to continue the phone call in private. The mother and daughter at the table exchanged conspiratorial glances. "I tried calling, but no one answered. I'm at my family's house, and I'll be back tomorrow." "That's too long. How about I send a driver to pick you up after dinner?" "No, definitely don't do that," Lucia panicked. "Give me a reason not to." "You said that you would give me freedom. I just want to spend some time at my parents' home. I'll be back first thing in the morning. I'll be the first thing you see when you open your eyes. Let me stay." Episode 32, Watching and Waiting. The line clicked as Dalen disconnected the call. Was that a yes? Lucia heaved a sigh of relief. If she didn't say that, with Dalen's ability to control everything, he would definitely do as he said. When she returned to the dining table, Lucia was preparing to eat. Barbara spoke with concern. "Who was that, Lucia?" "Why are you asking?" Lucia said in a disapproving tone. "I'm just concerned. You were in such a hurry to answer the phone," Barbara said. Her persistence and false concern was grating. Maybe this was how she got Lucia's father to marry her. "I'm just concerned," Lucia mimicked in a faint, nasally voice. She knew it was immature, but she could hardly stop herself. Barbara's face went extremely stiff, and she finally shut up. After dinner, Lucia went to the bathroom to take a bath. She threw her bag on the desk and left her phone on the bed. Macy listened at the door until all she could hear was water running from the bathroom. Then, Macy sneaked into Lucia's room and stole the phone off her bed to check the caller history. Macy was insatiably curious, but she was also suspicious. Lucia had been acting strange after taking the call at dinner. She found the most recent call, the one made at mealtime. She stared at it for a while, trying to decide what to do. Finally, she decided to just call the number back and get to the bottom of the whole ordeal. Macy redialed the number, and the line only rang a couple of times before the call connected and a deep voice sounded in her ear. "Did you miss me?" Macy was stunned. Why was this voice so familiar? She stayed silent, trying to place the voice, and finally something in her memory clicked. This was Dalen's voice. "Lucia, are you there?" His voice was like melted chocolate, and all Macy wanted was to listen to him talk all night. But instead, she immediately ended the call and threw the phone back on the bed. Staring at the cell phone on the bed, Macy felt her breath falter. Macy was sure that it was Dalen. Why on earth did Lucia have Dalen's cell phone number? And what about how he'd answered, "Did you miss me?" She thought about the day she saw Lucia and Dalen get in the car. Now she was certain it had been them. The relationship was clear. Lucia was actually having an affair with Dalen. Macy was so angry that she wanted to smash this phone. She was the one who was in love with Dalen. Why did Lucia always try to rob her? Her face twisted with hatred, and she turned around and left the room. Lucia, who had just finished her shower, had no clue any of this had happened, and went to bed pleasantly clueless. The next day, Lucia woke up long before anyone else in the house did. She had to make it back to the mansion before Dalen woke up. She rushed back to the house, and as soon as she burst through the front doors, she went in search of John. Once she found him, she asked, "Is Dalen up yet?" "Not yet," he answered. Lucia threw down her shoulder bag and headed for Dalen's room. She cracked open the door and tiptoed across the carpet. Dalen was lying on his bed. His arm was tucked under his head and his eyelashes brushed the tops of his cheeks. He looked so peaceful, so opposite of his tightly wound waking self. Lucia slowly approached, every step so careful. She didn't dare to wake Dalen up, so she decided to stand by the side and wait. The minutes stretched out, and Lucia was sure she'd become bored, but she kept herself entertained studying his sleeping figure. She looked at him in a way she didn't dare when he was awake. She watched as shadows moved across the contours of his face. His breath moved even and slow, making his chest rise and fall. It was no wonder that those women were so desperate, Lucia thought. Episode 33, Get Ready. Lucia had been standing by the bed since 6:30. 7 o'clock. 7:10. 7:30. Various breakfast foods had been prepared in the kitchen and were waiting for the host to arrive, but he continued sleeping, and Lucia continued standing by him. Something was different today, and even Spencer was confused. John asked Spencer, "Mr. Patrick usually comes downstairs at 7 o'clock sharp. Have you seen any sign of him? Should we start to bring the breakfast out?" Spencer thought about it and said, "Wait a little longer." Lucia was still beside Dalen, standing as still as a statue, but he didn't move. She folded her arms and leaned against the side of the bed, staring at his face to see if there were any signs of him waking up. She had made it here right on time. How long was he going to sleep for? She leaned over Dalen's body and rested her hand on his cheek. He was like a sleeping beast. She would never do this if he were awake. However, just as she was thinking about it, his eyes suddenly opened. Lucia gasped and was about to back away, but Dalen grabbed her arm, stopping her and holding her close to him. Lucia stretched out her other hand and braced in on the bed to keep from falling into him. Their lips were a breath apart. Lucia's heart pounded from surprise and something more. "If I never open my eyes, will you keep watching?" His voice was hoarse, like someone who had just woken up, but it was clear from the clarity in his eyes that he had been pretending to be asleep for a while. The arm she had supporting her began to shake, but she refused to give in. She stubbornly returned Dalen's stare, but soon got lost in the swirling colors in Dalen's eyes. "Enchanted by me?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Not at all. Didn't I say that I would be the first thing you saw when you opened your eyes? I kept my promise. With that, she tried standing, but Dalen kept his hand firmly on her arm. Lucia let out a frustrated sigh. You're still holding onto my arm. He smiled at her and let go. Help me get dressed. Dalen finally let go of her arm and walked to his closet, beckoning her to follow him. What? Said Lucia, who had just barely managed to stand up straight. Why do you need me to help? You're a grown man. You can do it yourself. He didn't respond, but she heard his voice from the closet saying, Come here. Lucia stomped her feet in rage and followed him into the closet. As soon as she set foot inside, she froze. Dalen had already taken off his pajamas and was only wearing boxers. He had his back to her, and she could see his muscles flex and relax as he stretched. Lucia caught Dalen's eye in his reflection in the mirror, and Dalen's gaze traveled up and down Lucia's body. He could hardly contain his desire, but he took a deep breath and remained in control of himself. What do you want me to wear? He asked quietly. Lucia composed herself, exhaled a breath of hot air, and walked toward Dalen, trying to act as though she could care less that he was almost naked. Dalen watched her as she approached. He'd never liked having people around in the morning. Before getting dressed and combing his hair, he felt almost vulnerable. But surprisingly, he liked that Lucia was here, seeing him like this. Lucia rifled through the clothes hanging in his closet without really knowing what she was looking for. Which pair of pants do you want to wear? Lucia asked, trying to get some sense of how to compose his outfit. Pick one, he responded unhelpfully. Dalen's closet was mainly made of dark colors. Lucia figured she better go with her safest option and selected the black pants. Episode 35. Looking for me? Cole was about to hang up, but Lucia quickly said, No, wait, I'm bored too. Let's do something fun. Cole smiled and borrowed his dad's car to go pick up Lucia. Seated in the passenger seat, Lucia opened the window and felt the free wind blowing on her face. Cole glanced over at her and asked, Why don't we do this more often? We will, Lucia smiled happily. She let her hand dangle out of the window and moved it up and down with the wind. With a face full of sun and a soul full of freedom, Lucia radiated beauty. Since it was the weekend, the roads were crowded with people looking for entertainment. Cole pulled up to a luxurious country club and waited for the attendant to open the gates for them to drive through. Hey, we're here to eat. Could you let us through? Sorry, if you aren't a member, you aren't allowed in, replied the attendant. Come on. We're just here to eat. We'll be in and out before you know it, Cole said. The attendant looked Cole up and down, as well as the beat-up car he was driving. He put on a mocking smile. His voice dripped with sarcasm. I'm sorry, sir. You just can't expect to be let into any respectable establishment dressed how you are and driving a car like that. Cole refused to give in. What kind of a rule is that? But the attendant was out of patience. If you don't leave now, I'll get the security guards to chase you away. Why are you being like this, man? Just let us through. Seeing that this argument was going nowhere, Lucia leaned over to Cole. Forget it. Let's just go somewhere else. This isn't worth it. Just give me a second. He brushed Lucia off. How about we give you a little extra and you let us through? Cole bargained with the attendant. The attendant was fed up and signaled for Cole to turn around. Just as Cole and her were getting ready to give up, she saw a luxury car inside the gates. There was only one man in this town who drove a car like that. Attendants were rushing to open the door of the car, and one of the servers already had a drink ready for the newcomer. Black leather shoes appeared out of the car, followed by long legs in dark black pants. Lucia blushed, remembering when she tried to dress Dalen in those very pants. Dalen got out of the car and he looked toward the gate. His eyes slightly narrowed upon seeing Lucia and Cole. Lucia felt really unlucky to bump into Dalen in this of all places. Dalen walked around the gate and leaned through Lucia's open window. Looking for me? He asked. No, we weren't looking for you. We were trying to get into this stupid club to eat some dinner, Lucia responded. Dalen eyed her skeptically. Well, since we've met, let's eat together. Lucia raised her head to look at him, but he was already waving at the attendant to let them through. Episode 34, I'll Leave You Alone. Dalen nodded his approval to the black pants and lifted his legs one at a time so Lucia could put them up to his waist. She tried her best to focus on the ground and not at Dalen's well-sculpted body. There were plenty of guys at Lucia's university who spent hours in the gym every day trying to get buff, but they were just weak chickens compared to Dalen. She kept pulling the pants up Dalen's body, but they got stuck just under his butt. Lucia tried to raise them again and used a bit more strength. A breath rattled in Dalen's chest, and he let out a deep groan. Confused, Lucia tried adjusting the pants again and pulled harder. Dalen's breath was heavier now. She looked at Dalen's reflection in the mirror and saw what was making the pants get stuck. Her face blushed bright red and her ears burned. She immediately closed her eyes and buried her face in Dalen's back. Lucia was so close he could smell her perfume, which was probably what caused the situation in the first place, Dalen thought. He could hardly keep himself from unraveling. Without turning to face her, he said, "You better go now. I'm dangerously close to breaking our 3-month deal." Lucia's heart quivered. She pulled back her hands, lowered her head, and ran out of the closet. Once she was out of his sight, she held her cool hands to her face to try and calm down. She was so ashamed. How could she have known that something like that would happen? And that she would like it? At the breakfast table, she sat across from Dalen, but could barely look at him. To her relief, Dalen didn't mention what happened in the closet and just ate in silence, but somehow that made it worse. Tension was so thick in the air that Lucia almost choked on it. Lucia decided not to go to Dalen's room for the rest of the morning. It was too dangerous. Luckily, Dalen seemed to have something to do and went out for the rest of the day, leaving Lucia to rest and stew in her own thoughts and fantasies. However, for Dalen, there was no rest. The formidable and incredibly wealthy Dietrich Group was under his control, but his grasp was tenuous. Rumors were flying about a change in leadership and overthrowing the Patrick family. Dalen truly hoped they were just rumors. Lucia had heard some of these rumors being passed around during lectures at her university, but she was sure that Dalen would have it under control. After all, he was one of the most influential and powerful men in the country. Later that day, Lucia's father called her to ask why she'd left the house so early. She made an excuse, saying that she'd had plans to hang out with Cole and some of their university friends. Her father mumbled something in response that Lucia couldn't quite understand, and then he hung up the phone. Lucia finished her homework in her room and scrolled on her phone for a while. She was very bored, but just when she was about to take a nap, Cole called. "Hey, are you bored? We should hang out. It would give you an excuse to get away from your stepmom." "I'm at Dalen's right now," Lucia responded. Should I hang up?" said Cole. "No, he's not at home right now," she answered. "Didn't you say you were staying with your family today? Why are you back with Dalen again? Is he seriously that controlling? You need to be careful with that guy." Lucia felt her eyebrows twitch. "Why do I need to be careful? It's not like he's holding me hostage or anything." "Then why do you give in to everything he asks you to do?" Cole argued. Not everything, Lucia thought, her mind replaying what had happened that morning in the closet. Lucia let herself fall back onto the bed and let out a frustrated groan. "Well, since you're obviously busy, I'll leave you alone." Episode 36, An Unexpected Dinner. Cole and Lucia drove through to the parking lot, debating whether or not to actually stay and eat with Dalen. "We don't really need to stay here. We can go somewhere else," Lucia said, as she got out of the car. Cole, who had fought so hard to get into the club in the first place, watched her get out and close the door. But he just continued driving and yelled through the window, "Sorry, Lucia. I just remembered that I still have something to do. I can pick you up when you're done." With that, he drove away. Lucia was dumbfounded, staring after the departed car. This was too embarrassing. Lucia smiled wryly at Dalen's amused face. "I'll take a taxi back. Bye." Lucia turned to leave, but Dalen reached for her shoulder and spun her around. She didn't realize how close they had been standing, and now they were face to face. Lucia was barely an inch away from Dalen's hard chest, and his hand was warm and heavy on her shoulder. Lucia's face instantly turned hot as she stared at Dalen. "Let's eat together," he said in a husky voice. "Okay," she whispered without thinking, as if in a trance. Lucia followed Dalen into the high-end clubhouse. Wherever they went, everyone whispered and pointed, and the staff was constantly hovering, waiting to meet Dalen's every request. They were led back to a private dining room, but there was already a man there waiting for him. They sat down at his table, and Dalen reached out to shake the man's hand. "Hi, Jeff. I didn't know you were in town," he said. The three of them ordered, and an awkward silence began. Lucia could feel Jeff staring at her, and goosebumps rose up her arms. It was a gaze that penetrated the soul. "I didn't expect you to be married, Dalen. I'm curious, how did she attract you?" Jeff said, talking about Lucia as if she wasn't sitting right across from him. Jeff wasn't that attractive, but he was definitely bold. "Don't be a jerk, Jeff," Dalen said. Then he turned and whispered to Lucia, "If you don't want to stay here, you don't have to." But Lucia didn't respond and sat in silence for the rest of the meal, but she could still feel his piercing gaze on her face and knew where it was coming from. When Dalen and her finally got up to leave, Jeff shook Dalen's hand and gave Lucia an awkwardly long hug. From what she gathered from their conversation, Jeff was a friend of Dalen's. He was a businessman from the Middle East, but they never talked about what kind of business he was in. After dinner, Lucia got in Dalen's car and went back to the castle. He followed behind her as she went to her room, and she could tell he was upset. He'd been strangely quiet ever since they left the club. When she tried to demand an explanation, she saw his face was contorted with anger. "Change your clothes," he said with no explanation. "Can pick out something new for you." Lucia didn't know what was going on, but she didn't want Dalen to pick her clothes, so she quickly went to the closet to change. After she came out, Dalen told the maid to throw the clothes she'd been wearing in the trash. Dalen was acting so strange, and now this? Lucia could hardly guess what was going on. Episode 37. Are you excited? It was obvious that it wasn't her clothes that annoyed Dalen, it was her. "What? Why throw away the clothes? They're practically brand new," said Lucia. "What a pity," Dalen said sarcastically with a cold and sinister look. "You should be glad that his hands only touched your clothes." Lucia suddenly remembered that Jeff had hugged her before they left. Was that why Dalen forced her to change clothes? It wasn't that long of a hug. Surely this is an overreaction. Lucia thought about not expressing her thoughts out loud at first. "You know you can't control everything around. You are upset with Jeff's behavior. My clothes have absolutely nothing to do with it," Lucia blurted out unapologetically. The next day, when Lucia went to campus for class, Cole found her on her way to her first lecture. "Have you seen the poster?" he asked, breathless from running. "No. What poster?" "It was published on the student forum." Cole turned on his cell phone and opened the page. Lucia's eyes went wide as she saw the picture. There was a man and a woman kissing in a dark corner, and the woman was facing the camera. This woman was Lucia herself. She couldn't tell who the guy was, but the only guy she'd ever kissed was Dalen. "Are you cheating on Dalen?" Cole asked. "What are you talking about? What's going on? I've never even kissed someone else." But Lucia's mind was racing. How many people have seen this photo? And most importantly, had Dalen seen it? "Well, If it's not you, then someone really has it out for you. The Photoshop on this is unbelievable. It looks like it's real. While Lucia was frowning and gritting her teeth at whoever had framed her, the guy in the photo showed up. What's with the frown? When she turned around, she saw Josh. Lucia was confused. Why was Josh here? She realized that he was the guy who was in the photo. I think we look pretty good together, don't you? Josh waved the photo in front of Lucia. It was the one that was posted on the forum. You did this? Lucia asked, trying and failing to calm herself down. That's right. Isn't it cool? On Lucia's other side, Cole wanted to help, but she was blocked in by the guys with Josh. Josh looked at Lucia's delicate face and asked, Does the prospect of a relationship with me excite you? Do you want another deep kiss? I promise. Before he could finish, Lucia pulled back her hand and punched him in the face. Ah! Josh fell on the ground. Lucia stepped forward and stomped on Josh's crotch, making him howl and curl up in a ball. I got you excited. I'm making you excited. I'm making you excited. Lucia muttered as she stomped with more strength. Josh cried even louder, trying to attract the attention of someone who could get Lucia to stop. Episode 38. Who said she didn't have a family? Students were gathering around the scene, staring in shock at Lucia and Josh, but eventually someone came in and broke the fight. In the dean's office, Josh was sitting on the sofa, moaning in pain. His parents were beside him, urging him to go to the doctor. Josh pointed at Lucia angrily. You're insane! Josh's parents immediately pointed the finger at Lucia and said harshly, Josh is the only son in our family. You'll pay for this. You aren't even that attractive, and besides, looks aren't everything. You'd never be good enough for our son. Lucia lifted her eyelids and looked at his parents' beet-red faces. I didn't have a choice. Your son shamelessly posted a fake photo of me and him on the student forum. I'm just trying to defend myself and clear my name. Josh's father pointed his finger at Lucia and was shaking. He turned around to the dean. If she's already acting out now, imagine what kind of damage she'll cause later. I must teach her a lesson. As he spoke, he secretly passed something into the hands of the dean. Lucia saw it and guessed that it must be a bribe. The dean accepted it and slipped it into a drawer under his desk. Then he looked at Lucia with a serious and stern expression. This matter has seriously affected the school's reputation. The school has always emphasized peace and harmony. Do you understand how serious this is? What if a news reporter had been here? Furthermore, Josh's injury seems to be very serious. You'll need to help mitigate the costs of any damage you've done to the school and any injury you've caused Josh. I'm sure you alone won't be able to compensate much. The dean turned to a teacher beside him. Did you contact her family? I'm sorry, Dean. The guardian paperwork in Lucia's documents is blank, the teacher said. What? The dean couldn't believe it and turned to Lucia. You don't have a guardian? No. Lucia shook her head, secretly thanking herself for never filling out the form. You are an orphan? You have no family? The dean asked again, incredulous. Just as Lucia impatiently repeated her answer to the dean, the door to his office burst open. A tall man loomed in the doorway. Who said she had no family? Lucia turned her head in shock and saw her family, Dalen, stride into the office and take a seat beside her. His entire body was emitting a cold aura. His sharp eyes were enough to make people fear him. Everyone in the office had some status, but it was as if an unreachable god had suddenly appeared in front of them. The dean stood up, but his head barely reached Dalen's shoulder. Dalen swept his sharp gaze across the office. Everyone felt a chill in the air. Why aren't you speaking? Did you say you needed to talk to her family? Dalen asked. You are Mr. Patrick? The dean stammered. Don't be so nervous. Just say whatever you want to say. Tell me what happened, Dalen said. Episode 39, The Real Kiss. Dalen's presence caused everyone's arrogance to evaporate. Lucia was the most nervous one in the room. Why had Dalen come here, she thought. I can't let him know what happened. I can't let him see that photo. However, her fear came true almost immediately. Actually, it's not that big of a deal. It's mainly because of this photo, the dean said with an apologetic smile. Show it to me, Dalen said. The dean immediately pulled out his phone, navigated to the forum, and handed it to Dalen. Dalen's eyes fell on the screen and his face immediately turned dark. The entire office seemed to have turned into an ice house. Dalen raised his eyes slowly and looked toward Lucia. Lucia instinctively took a step back. The hurt look in his eyes was almost worse than anger. It's not a big deal to have a relationship in college. You know, some people even get married in college. However, there seems to have been a misunderstanding about this particular photo, and there was an altercation. The headmaster tried to mediate. However, when he saw Dalen's harsh stare, he stopped mid-sentence and shivered. Dalen looked at Josh's parents beside him and asked in an overly friendly tone, Why aren't you talking? Let me hear what you think about all this. The air was suffocating. Well, Lucia, she hurt my son. She punched him in the face and stomped repeatedly on his crotch. We only followed the normal channels to find out what happened, and we didn't have any other intentions. The arrogance and threats had disappeared. They were both trembling with fear. Dalen's black eyes narrowed. His sharp and cold gaze fell on Josh, who was lying on the sofa and didn't dare make a sound. Is that you in the photo? Dalen asked. Yes, Josh responded. The moment Josh said yes, Dalen suddenly raised his foot and stomped on Josh's leg. Josh cried out and pulled his hurt leg up to his chest. Josh's parents were so scared that their faces turned pale. They didn't dare to say anything against Dalen. Lucia's entire mind was buzzing as she slowly moved towards the door, hoping to make a quiet getaway. When she slid out of the office, she saw Spencer and all of Dalen's bodyguards outside the door. She swallowed and smiled amiably at them. Then she turned around and ran. Dalen's tall and straight figure stormed out of the dean's office and sighed when he saw Lucia's retreating figure. He turned to Spencer. Well, I guess we better go after her. Lucia felt that if she didn't run now, she would die of shame. However, before she could reach the bottom of the stairs, Dalen caught up to her and grabbed her arm. His arms held her in place, strong and powerful. Please, let me explain. That photo was photoshopped and posted by Josh, and I have nothing to do with it at all, Lucia explained with panic in her voice. Dalen had her against the wall now, and his body was almost pressing against hers. Well, if it's nothing, then why are you running? Dalen asked, humor in his voice. Lucia couldn't think of a way to answer his question. Dalen was so close she could smell his shampoo, and her brain was fogging over with the intoxicating smell. Slowly, she realized she'd stopped struggling against Dalen's body and had started leaning closer to him. Both of them started breathing heavily as their faces came closer together. And eventually, the tension snapped, and their arms were wrapped around each other, and Dalen's mouth was finally on hers. The day of their wedding, her first kiss was stolen by Dalen, but that was just a light and quick kiss. This was entirely different. Episode 40, Kiss Me Again. Dalen's mouth pressed against Lucia's with a desperate ferocity, and she responded by opening her mouth wider and deepening the kiss. With the tension finally gone, the release was euphoric. They couldn't get enough of each other, but eventually Lucia ran out of breath and had to come up for air. They stood with their faces just separated, gasping for air. Lucia's knees were so weak she could hardly stand, but Dalen's arms were around her waist, keeping her upright. If she wasn't being held by him, she would have slid to the ground. Breathing rapidly, Dalen's face was flushed red, his lips swollen and moist. "I'm sorry. Was that too far?" Dalen's anger had disappeared with their kiss, leaving only a suppressed, husky voice. Lucia couldn't speak. She just shook her head no and kept staring into his eyes. Dalen let out a quiet groan and bowed his head down to her ear. He kissed her neck and said, "Do you have any idea all the things I could do to you? How I could make you moan with pleasure?" Dalen's voice was hoarse, and his breath tickled Lucia's ears. Her body was somehow stiff and relaxed, but finally Dalen pulled back slightly and she was able to clear her head. "Dalen, you should let go of me. This is a school. People will see." Lucia tried to push him away, but her resolve was disintegrating as Dalen kept looking at her with those dark and desperate eyes. He didn't respond to her, and he didn't move away. Finally, she pulled him closer. "Kiss me again." As soon as the words were out of her mouth, Dalen obliged. Pleasure ricocheted through her body as he wrapped one arm tighter around her waist and lifted his other hand behind her head. Her heart thumped crazily. His breathing quickened. That feeling was like nothing she'd ever experienced. She lost track of how long they'd been standing there, but Dalen eventually pulled away, kissed her forehead gently, and walked away. After Dalen was gone, Lucia went to the bathroom to catch her breath and pull herself together. Her lips in the mirror were red and swollen, and she wanted to wait until the swelling subsided before returning to her lectures. She couldn't let anyone see her like this. Anyone with experience would immediately know what happened. Lucia poked her lips with a thin white finger as she thought back to the kiss. Warmth flooded her body. When Lucia finally returned to the classroom, Cole came over and asked, "I heard Dalen was here?" "How did you hear?" Lucia asked. "A bunch of students saw him stalking through the halls. Was he looking for you?" "The dean said he wanted to see my parents, but who knew Dalen would come? What else do you know?" Lucia asked. "Nothing," Cole responded. Lucia thought for a moment, then went close to Cole's ear and whispered a few words. Cole's expression changed drastically. "You what?" His outburst drew curious looks from the people around them. "Be quiet," Lucia said, smacking Cole's arm. "Oh my God, that sounds insane! You and Dalen? But Josh totally deserved everything he got. I can't believe he had the guts to post that photo on the forum. He never would have done that, though, if he knew that you're Dalen's woman." Cole giggled. The rumors about what had happened died down pretty quickly over the next few days, and no one ever suspected that there was actually a relationship between Dalen and her. As for what happened in the dean's office, as long as they didn't want the news to spread, no one would know about it. However, the whole situation made Lucia even more paranoid about keeping her married life with Dalen a secret. What Dalen did to Josh was not known to the school, but Macy, who cared about it, was persistent and finally found out. When she first went to find Josh to try and get him to start trouble, she didn't say anything directly. It was Josh's idiotic idea to make the photograph. And it worked just the way Macy hoped it would. She was just thinking that if Dalen knew about Josh and Lucia, he wouldn't give Lucia a second thought. Macy went to find Barbara to clarify her lingering doubts. Barbara said, "You saw Dalen go to Lucia's school?" "Yes, and I heard from my other classmates that Dalen went straight to the dean's office where Lucia was." "Well, Josh's business is definitely related to Dalen. Listen to me, that man is very dangerous. Offend him and it will be hard to survive here." "Then what should we do?" asked Macy. "I'm in love with Dalen and I can't let Lucia take him." Macy got anxious. "You silly girl, this is just a phase. Dalen's just another pretty face and that beauty will fade with time. Just you wait." "Mom, you have to give me useless advice. I want to marry Dalen. Just think about it. If I married Dalen, your social status would skyrocket. Macy pleaded coquettishly. Don't worry. I'm sure if someone as simple as Lucia can get Dalen's attention, you definitely can. Barbara's eyes were full of scheming, a smile that was determined to win. They both went to Mr. Elrod's study to talk with him about the situation. What did you say? Dalen went to the school to find Lucia? How is that possible? Do they even know each other? Mr. Elrod stood up from the desk and began to pace the room. I couldn't believe it at first either, but it is absolutely true. And didn't she go home on the day of rest a few days ago? I got a call while I was eating. I was worried that Lucia had something on her mind that she didn't want to tell her family, so I flipped through her phone records. After returning the call, I heard Dalen's voice on the other end of the line. I swear, there's something fishy going on here, Macy said. How could she be in a relationship with Dalen? The two of them have no way of knowing each other. Mr. Elrod was still unwilling to believe it. Actually, there is some evidence for this, honey, said Barbara. First, I don't think Macy would lie about something like this. And second, have you forgotten how Dalen appeared on our wedding anniversary? You said it was an accident on the invite list, but why would someone like Dalen attend such a banquet for no reason at all? We are so far below his level. Third, Lucia and Dalen are both unmarried. What could stop them from falling in love? But I am worried about Dalen's intentions. Is he lying to Lucia about his feelings? Episode 41. Step Back. Lucia was staying on campus to play video games with Cole and avoid having to confront Dalen, when suddenly Cole nudged her. What? She asked without looking up. He poked her again. Lucia had no choice but to look up, and she saw a figure standing outside the window. She was stunned. She put down her cell phone and walked out of the classroom. What are you doing here? Come have a meal with me, her father said calmly, showing none of his anxiety. But it had been a long time since her father had done something like this for her, so Lucia was immediately suspicious. Did I do something wrong? Why? Do you think you did something wrong? No. Lucia shook her head. Lucia went to eat with her father with all kinds of thoughts swirling around in her head. They ordered their meal and started eating, and finally Lucia started to relax. It seemed like everything really was normal. Lucia was still a bit suspicious, though. This was the first time since she'd left for college that he'd come over to have dinner with her. Could it be that he was in a bad mood? Is everything all right, Dad? Are you going to divorce Barbara? Lucia asked, hoping for an affirmative answer. All she got was a cold and detached look from her father. Apparently, he was not going to get a divorce. Lucia did not dare ask any more questions, lowering her head as she ate. You really don't like your stepmom and sister? Her dad asked. Never asked me that before. Why are you asking now? It's too late anyway. Doesn't matter how I feel about them, Lucia said. Is it because of them that you're so rebellious? Her dad asked. Lucia didn't think that she was rebellious, and even if she was, isn't that just part of growing up and learning to be independent? But maybe she wouldn't be so stubborn if her father had actually shown up and cared about her all along, instead of just every once in a while. It was clear to her that he cared more about Barbara and Macy than about her. She decided not to say anything, so her father continued. If you want to rebel, you have to at least have a plan. Why are you messing around with people like Dalen? Lucia froze. What did you say? Do you think I don't know anything about your life just because you choose to keep your distance? Stay away from Dalen. He's dangerous, her father said harshly. Lucia could tell that at least her father didn't know that she was married to Dalen, or this would have been a much different conversation. Oh, I get it. You're here to make sure I don't get in the way of Macy's plan to win over Dalen, Lucia said. What? I don't know what you're talking about, her father responded. Don't you? Aren't you afraid that if I get too close to Dalen, it will affect Macy's chances of marrying him? What does this have to do with her? Her father's face did not look good. Lucia continued. Then tell me, why are you so concerned about me and Dalen getting together? There are so many women clamoring for his attention. Why is it so bad that he's chosen to pay attention to me? Now her dad started to yell. Do you know what Dalen is capable of? What are you getting yourself into? Her dad asked sternly. You're only 20 years old and don't know anything. In the end, this is only going to hurt you. However, Lucia could not believe a single word he said. He put on a good performance, acting concerned for her welfare, but she knew it was all for the sake of Barbara and her daughter. Lucia felt the bitterness in her heart and asked, Dad, do you still remember the dress that Mother was wearing when she married you? No? Well, I don't suppose you remember anything about her, and I know that as time passes, you will also forget her daughter. Thanks for the food. I'm going back to school. She got up to leave when her dad called out, Stop right there! Lucia could tell he was angry, but she acted as if she didn't hear him and ran out. She kept running for a long time, fighting tears, and when she finally wore herself out, she realized that he was heading in the wrong direction. She was miles away from campus. Exhausted, she sat down on the curb. The bitterness in her heart rushed to her eyes and gathered into tears that rushed down her face faster than she could wipe them away. So she gave up wiping and just buried her face in her knees. She would rather live alone with her father than have a mother and sister like Barbara and Macy. Why did such a malicious woman insist on forcing their way into her family? Lucia cried for a while until she got a strange feeling that she was being watched. She raised her head and saw Jeff looking down at her. His eyes were cold and his expression was threatening. She felt as if the air around her had turned cold. You're sad, Jeff said with fake sympathy. Lucia lowered her head to wipe her tears before standing up, her eyes still red. What a coincidence! I bumped into you here, Lucia said, trying to smile and keep the mood light. Wow, your smile is so ugly. Jeff said this with his usual cold expression. Lucia's face instantly dropped. How could he be so rude when she was obviously already upset? As expected, Dalen's friends were just as difficult to deal with as Dalen was. There was no mistake about it. Jeff slowly approached Lucia, who retreated until her back was pressed against the wall. What are you doing? Lucia was flustered. Jeff continued to approach, staring at Lucia's face until he was so close that she could clearly smell his breath. What was he trying to do? Jeff and Dalen were friends. There was no way he would threaten her, right? This face certainly does have an allure. Jeff's gaze wantonly traced Lucia's face. Lucia did not understand. What are you talking about? Jeff didn't say anything again and just stared at her silently. Lucia didn't like being stared at like that. Haven't you heard? You can't bully your friend's wife. Am I bullying you? Jeff asked calmly. Even the air he exhaled had a hint of coldness to it. Please step back. I wish I had a rock or something, Lucia thought. All she wanted to do was knock this creepy guy out. Just as she thought that, the corner of Jeff's mouth suddenly curled up. It was a very faint smile, but it made Lucia feel cold for no reason. Then, without explanation, Jeff turned around and walked away. Just as he made it to the end of the road, a car stopped for him. He opened the door and got in, leaving just like that. Lucia was left completely confused. What's wrong with these people? She thought. Back at the Elrod house, Macy was impatient. Her stepfather had made no progress in dissuading Lucia or creating an opportunity for a proper introduction for her and Dalen. Most importantly, Macy was afraid that Dalen would be dominated by Lucia for too long. She couldn't wait any longer. So one day she followed Lucia on campus, She wanted to see if she had a date with Dalen or something. When Lucia walked out of her campus, Macy followed right behind her. Episode 42, Private Territory. Lucia took a taxi. Macy got into a taxi behind her and followed. The car ahead skidded as it drove, winding quickly through the streets. The driver asked her, "Do you want to keep following them?" "Obviously. What's wrong?" Macy asked, puzzled. "We're getting close to the private neighborhoods. We can't get in without a passcode." "Just stay close to them and tail them through the gates. Don't worry, you'll be paid well." The driver, for the sake of money, kept following. When he turned onto a side street, they were immediately stopped while Lucia's taxi up ahead drove straight through. Lucia's driver nodded to the fierce-looking man in black guarding the street and said he had taken the wrong road before flipping around and heading back. After driving for a short while, Macy requested to get out of the car. Standing next to the car, she tried getting a glimpse of what was at the end of the street, but she couldn't see anything, so she got back in the car again. "This is a private area. There's a huge mansion up there," the driver said with an exaggerated expression. "A mansion?" "That's right. I've never taken anyone up there, but I've heard about it." Macy had the driver take her home and went straight up to her room. Her mother followed close behind. "My precious daughter, what's going on? What happened?" Barbara walked into the room and sat down beside Macy. "Did Daddy not mention me to Dalen at all? Why is nothing happening?" Macy was extremely depressed. "I mean, we are talking about Dalen, after all. He's a big deal. At the very least, we must find the right time," Barbara responded. "Mom, do you think I don't know that? But I saw how Dad acted when he talked about Lucia. His face was full of worry. He didn't care about how I felt about her at all. I even suspect that after he found out that Lucia and Dalen were in a relationship, he wanted them to get married. She's his own daughter, and I'm not," Macy said angrily. All right. If it really was like that, then it would be all right. Besides, you don't have to go through him to get what you want." "Then why can't I see Dalen? He's always surrounded by bodyguards. I can't even get close." Macy frowned as she said this. "Then just go through Lucia," Barbara said, with a scheming look in her eyes. "What do you mean?" asked Macy. "As long as you pretend to have a good relationship with Lucia, you will have more opportunities to get close with Dalen. She's even more reliable than your dad." Macy suddenly understood the meaning behind Barbara's words. "I mean, that could work, but I don't want to be friends with Lucia at all. I don't even want to hear her name ever again." Barbara scoffed. "Do you really want this? Then it doesn't matter if you have to make some sacrifices from time to time. By the time you snatch Dalen away, dealing with Lucia will be like stepping on an ant." Macy realized her mother was right. Once she married Dalen, all her problems with Lucia would go away. She would have the last laugh. So Macy told Barbara everything about how she tried following Lucia during the day. "So she went up to the mansion?" Barbara was puzzled. "That's right. The driver said so. And as far as I know, Lucia hasn't come out again since she went in." Barbara's expression changed. "Only Dalen has a mansion like this close to Los Angeles. Did you see it with your own eyes?" "I tried, but I couldn't get a good view." "Mom, don't tell me that Lucia has already moved in with Dalen." Macy grabbed her pillow and screamed into it. Barbara rubbed her daughter's back. "Don't worry, and don't forget what your mom told you just now. It's never too late." Macy looked up at the encouraging look Barbara gave her, and only then did she start to feel some kind of hope. She'd never wanted Dalen as badly as she did then. Later at the university, Lucia was sitting in the cafeteria with her lunch spread out on the table when someone dropped a cookie in front of her. She thought it was Cole because only Cole would buy her food this way. However, when she looked up, she almost gasped in surprise. Macy slid into the seat next to her. Seeing Macy sitting elegantly beside her, Lucia asked, "What do you want?" "I apologize for what happened," Macy said. "And which horrible thing are you apologizing for exactly?" Lucia asked. "I know I've treated you badly in the past. I was always against you and even robbed your things, but I hope you won't be angry with me." Lucia had been leaning back in her chair, but after Macy finished speaking, she couldn't help but lean forward as she stared at Macy, asking, "You are Macy, right? You haven't been possessed or something?" "I know you don't believe me, but I mean it. We all really miss you at home, especially Dad, even if he doesn't act like it. Come back this week, and when you get back, you'll know if my apology is sincere or not." With that, Macy stood up and left the cafeteria. She brushed past Cole, who had just entered. Cole came up to Lucia and asked, "What's the matter? You're not being bullied, are you?" Lucia pouted at the cookie on the table. "She was here to apologize. She wanted me to forgive her." "Has she gone crazy?" Cole asked. "You see, even you don't believe it, so why should I?" Lucia shrugged helplessly. "This cookie reminds me of a story," Cole said with a smile. "What story?" Lucia asked. "The poisonous apple of Snow White's mother." Cole immediately smiled. "Don't worry, your Mr. Patrick alone can take on 10 men. He'll protect you." "Oh, wait, are you actually complimenting him?" Lucia asked. Cole responded, "Anyone can tell just from looking at him that Dalen is built like an ox. Plus, I've heard he's got a huge dick." Lucia felt a little uncomfortable. "Who said that?" "Well, just look at those pants he wore the other day. They were so tight you could practically see its outline. Did you not notice?" Lucia's face was blushing a deep red. "What were you doing looking?" "You can't blame me for that. It's that obvious," said Cole, unconcerned. Lucia was getting more and more uncomfortable by the second, but she had to admit Cole was right. After all, she had seen him naked, even if it was by accident. After 3 months had passed, if she still wasn't able to get a divorce, she'd have to deal with that fact one way or another. Later that night, Lucia tried her best to forget her conversation with Cole and focus on her homework, but it was almost impossible. She kept spinning her pen nimbly between her fingers. Tomorrow was Friday, the day she usually went back to visit her family. What if she just didn't go? What if she did? Episode 43, Holding Hands. Lucia had so much on her mind, she sent her pen, and it rolled under the sofa. Lucia was about to go crazy. Even her pen was against her. Lucia had no choice but to lie on the floor and reach under the sofa for her pen. She was surprised. Even under the couch, the carpet was so clean that there was not even a speck of dust. Lucia hadn't changed out of her school clothes, and she wore a sheer blouse and a short pink skirt. She had almost retrieved the pen, but it was just out of her reach. She was still on the floor when Dalen walked in. His body reacted immediately when he saw Lucia on the ground. Dalen's sharp black eyes narrowed dangerously. However, Lucia, who had her attention focused on finding the pen, didn't notice that he had come in, until a strong hand rested on her body and pulled her back. She jumped and lurched forward, one hand flustered as she straightened her clothes. When he turned around and saw Dalen, who was standing above her, she was furious. "What are you doing? You scared me!" "I like your outfit," Dalen responded with a smile. Lucia's face turned red after being stunned for a moment. Dalen stared at Lucia's bright red face, and she felt like he could read her every thought and emotion in her mind. What are you looking at? Lucia's ears turned red. She wished she could find a hole to hide in. Really, why was he always looking at her like this? I see you, Lucia, and you look beautiful. And I enjoy looking at beautiful things. I'm looking for a pen. It rolled under the sofa, Lucia said innocently. Dalen walked in front of the sofa without breaking eye contact and lifted it up with one hand holding onto the edge. Lucia looked at him in astonishment. Dalen actually lifted up the sofa with one hand, and he hardly had to try. It was as if he was holding up a piece of cotton instead of a sofa. The muscles in his arm, which were covered by his black shirt, were taut and solid. Lucia ducked under the couch and grabbed her pen. Dalen then put down the sofa. Lucia stood up without a word and sat at the table, fiddling with her homework. The pen in her hand was trembling slightly. What was Dalen doing in her room? Why wasn't he leaving? She had promised herself that she wouldn't get close to Dalen. Do you want me to help you? Dalen was standing beside Lucia, gesturing to her homework that was still only half done. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on her, causing her breathing to become unstable. Lucia raised her eyes slightly and faced Dalen's imposing face with a doubtful tone. You know how to do advanced statistics? As soon as she finished asking, Dalen dragged his stool to the side and sat on it. He brought Lucia's homework in front of him and pulled out the pen in her hand. He was helping her with her homework. At first, Lucia was skeptical, but later she realized that Dalen really did solve the problem she'd been stuck on for hours. Had he studied statistics before, or was he just some kind of genius? Lucia secretly glanced up at Dalen's face. All his focus was on the question. No matter the angle, his face was as cold and hard as a sculpture. Lucia remembered that when she was in high school, there was a boy who helped her with her homework. Lucia was so happy, but not long after, the boy was transferred to another school. No one ever helped her with her homework again. She didn't expect the second person to be Dalen. Maybe he wasn't so bad after all. Lucia was lost in thought. When Dalen suddenly looked over and stared at her, Lucia finally snapped out of her daze and gave him a shy smile. He had caught Lucia staring, and now her heart was beating faster and her face was burning. Dalen's deep black eyes seemed to have swallowed her whole. He was devilishly charming and arrogant. Her face began to warm. Lucia exhaled a few breaths. She tried changing the subject. Dalen, can I go home tomorrow? You want to go home? Dalen's voice was low and hoarse. Yes, if I don't go back every week, my father will start to get suspicious. Didn't you go back last week? Dalen argued. Yes, but I only stayed one night last week and I snuck out in the morning. A few days ago, my father came to the school to look for me. I think he must have suspected something is going on between us. Dalen didn't say anything. He just went back to writing on the paper. Let me go back? I only go back once a week anyway, and I live in the mansion every other day. Lucia felt that her request was reasonable. However, no, Dalen said simply, as if there was no room for negotiation. Lucia slumped on the table. She switched into her most sulking, begging tone. Please, just for a little while. No, Dalen answered again. No matter what tactic Lucia tried, it would be useless. Lucia kept watching as Dalen did her homework, and eventually dozed off. Her small mouth was slightly open, and she was breathing lightly, as if a gentle breeze was blowing. Her pink lips reminded Dalen of the color of her skirt. Dalen's pupils darkened, and his breathing became heavier. He wrapped his fingers around Lucia's hand, and her hand responded by opening and grabbing onto his. Her soft touch drove Dalen crazy with desire. Dalen rubbed the back of her soft hand with his thumb and held it tightly. Episode 44. Did Dalen not ask you out? Lucia eventually shifted and her hand fell out of Dalen's grip. Dalen stared at Lucia, thinking about how beautiful she was even in her sleep. He reached his hand out and gently caressed her cheek, running his thumb along her cheekbone. Lucia sighed, as the touch started to bring her back into consciousness. Ah! Lucia opened her eyes and she saw Dalen so close to her. They both startled and fell away from each other. Lucia was so shocked, but also surprised at how gentle Dalen had been. She stared at him for a moment before she quickly looked away. He didn't say anything, but she heard the sound of the door closing. Lucia looked up and Dalen was gone. What had happened? What had gotten into Dalen? Lucia's face alternated between blushing and anger. She couldn't relax in front of him even for a second. He couldn't be trusted. Fortunately, she had 3 months to try and get out of this. No, she had to finish this quickly. Later that day, after class ended, Lucia stalled for time and lingered behind. Why aren't you leaving? You can't bear to part from me? Cole asked with a smile. Well, I think my family will find out eventually. Lucia sighed and shook her head with a sad look on her face. You mean about you being married to Dalen? Lucia nodded. Why do you even feel the need to hide it? You're married. That's huge. How can you hide it from your own family? Cole asked. I don't know. I guess I think that as long as I work hard to make Dalen give up on me within 3 months, then no one will have to know. After he married you, did he still bring other women around? Maybe you could catch him cheating or something. How would I know? All I know is that there are women around me who like him, said Lucia. Like who? Asked Cole. Like Macy? Maybe I could try to get Dalen and Macy together. Lucia rubbed her chin as she pondered and calculated. When Lucia returned to the mansion, Dalen was not there. Just as she entered her room, her phone rang. Although there was no caller ID, she could tell that it was Dalen with just a glance. She hesitated before answering. Hello? I'm not coming back for dinner tonight, Dalen said in his usual deep voice. Oh. After hanging up the phone, Lucia stood there in a daze. If Dalen didn't come back to eat, then why would he bother calling her? It was like a husband calling his wife. The thought made Lucia's face redden. Dalen had important business to attend to and had gone to meet with Jeff. When he entered the office, Jeff was sitting silently in the room. He didn't make an indication that he noticed Dalen enter the room. He seemed to be lost in thought. Finally, Dalen cleared his throat and Jeff raised his eyes to nod a welcome to Dalen. When Dalen sat down, Jeff said in a faint voice, What? Are you done telling your woman you won't make it home for dinner? Dalen didn't say anything. He took out a cigarette and lit it up. With a da sound, he threw the expensive lighter to the side. His thin lips held the cigarette as he took 2 deep breaths. White smoke curled out from between his lips. When are you going back to the Middle East? Dalen asked lightly, as he rolled the cigarette between his fingers. There's no rush for business over there, Jeff said. Noticing Dalen's indifferent expression, he said, You didn't even send me an invitation when you got married. I'm hurt. Didn't I tell you? Dalen asked casually. No, you only mentioned to me after it happened. I would like to ask, why did you marry her? Dalen narrowed his eyes and said, No comment. Back at the mansion, Lucia was playing with her cell phone on her bed. After finishing a game, she checked the time and saw that it was 11 o'clock. She yawned and stood up to prepare to wash and go to sleep. But as she passed the door, she heard footsteps. Did Dalen just come back? Lucia opened the door just wide enough to hold her head out. She looked down the hall and saw Dalen's tall figure on the stairs. When he met her eyes, she asked, Did you just make it home? What time is it? Dalen frowned. Almost 11. I couldn't sleep, Lucia answered. Well, next time you're up this late and can't sleep, come and sleep with me, Dalen said teasingly. The word sleep made the corner of Lucia's mouth twitch, and she closed the door. The next day was finally the weekend, and Lucia slept late into the afternoon. When she finally woke up, she reached for her phone on the bedside table. It was 10 o'clock and there were 2 missed calls. Lucia had a habit of muting her cell phone before going to bed, so the calls hadn't woken her up. She looked at the caller history and saw both missed calls were from Macy. Lucia glanced at the screen and threw her phone to the side of the bed. However, just as she was about to go to the bathroom to wash up, her cell phone rang. Turning around, she saw that it was still Macy. She answered harshly, "What is it?" "Why haven't you come back yet? Didn't you promise that you'd come home this weekend?" Macy's voice sounded gentle, but Lucia was suspicious. "I happen to have something going on, so I won't be coming back. I don't want to go back and forth from school. Sorry," said Lucia, rolling her eyes. "Fine," Macy said, pausing before asking again. "What are you planning to do today? You won't stay in your dorm forever, will you?" "I haven't decided what to do yet." "So, Dalen didn't ask you out? He should have asked you out today no matter what." "What makes you think that Dalen should have asked me out? We don't even know each other." The lie came easily from Lucia's mouth. Episode 45. It's a date. Or is it? Lucia thought to herself, how did Macy know that Dalen and I are so close? She had denied it the last time. But Macy had seen her in Dalen's car, so Macy would not believe what Lucia said. "Stop with the games. I know you're lying and I want to meet Dalen," Macy said forcefully. Lucia knew that it would be easier to just get this over with. "What do you want?" she asked, giving in. "I want the 3 of us to go out to lunch together," Macy said with triumph in her voice. Lucia thought for a moment before refusing, but then decided against it. So this was her goal. She decided to humor Macy for a change. "Sure, I'll send you the address when we find out where we can eat," Lucia answered, and hung up the phone before Macy could respond. After Lucia finished washing up, she entered the closet. When she looked for clothes, she found that there seemed to be a lot of new clothes and even shoes and jewelry. She didn't notice yesterday because she didn't need to get dressed last night. Dalen must have had these brought in. She avoided the new clothes and found a casual dress and put it on. White shoes covered her feet, and she stared at herself in the mirror, surprised at how beautiful she looked in such simple clothes. When she went downstairs, she saw Dalen, who was sitting on the sofa in the hall watching TV. The live broadcast of the boxing competition was playing on television. Watching the impact of each punch made Lucia feel like the muscles in her body were about to explode. Lucia thought about Dalen's figure as she watched the practically naked men wrestle on the TV. Suddenly, the television turned dark and Lucia came back to her senses. She looked at Dalen with a cold gaze and asked, "Why did you turn it off?" "If you want to see mostly naked men rolling around, I can show it to you right now. Not only can you see it, you can also touch it." "What do you think?" Dalen asked, laughing. Lucia was baffled. Dalen was too unpredictable. In the end, she didn't turn on the TV. Lucia really wanted to turn around and leave, but she thought about her conversation with Macy earlier. "Dalen, can I ask you, have you ever been asked out by a girl before?" She knew it was a stupid question. "If you want to ask me out, you already know my answer," he said with a smile. "Okay, well then, I guess I'm asking you out," Lucia said shyly. "I'll think about it," Dalen said, turning away from her. "What? What do you need to think about? You said you would say yes. Let's go out for lunch today. My treat." Lucia was desperate to get this to work in her favor. She grabbed Dalen's hand, afraid that she'd been too eager. This was actually Dalen's first time being treated to a meal by a girl. The feeling was very fresh, and Dalen wanted to relish it just a bit longer. When Lucia saw Dalen looking straight at her, she realized that Dalen had twisted his hand around to hold onto hers. Her face turned red, and she tried to withdraw her hand, but Dalen's grasp was firm. She couldn't escape. Lucia tried twice more to pull her hand away, but failed to pull it back. Dalen's expression did not change at all, as if he did not use any power at all. Just as Lucia was about to try again, Dalen said in a low and hoarse voice, "I guess I can schedule you in, but it depends on your performance." "What performance?" Lucia forgot her struggle and looked back, puzzled. Guessing at what Dalen might be talking about, she argued, "You said you would give me 3 months." "Don't worry, I'm not talking about that," Dalen said, with just a touch of hurt in his voice. "Then," Lucia asked, "well, you need to actually act like we're married, like I'm your husband." Lucia's face immediately turned as red as the sunset. The heat rushed to her head. It was extremely awkward, but it wasn't nearly as bad as she had initially thought. "Sure," said Lucia with obvious hesitance. "Well, if you're not into it, then there's no need to keep our date," Dalen threatened. Lucia cursed silently. "What if I call you something else?" Lucia asked. "Like what?" Dalen asked. Lucia bit her pink lips, leaving a pink impression. She then blushed and said, "My darling." When the word darling came out of Lucia's mouth, it was so soft that it made Dalen's heart quiver. His black eyes lightened. Lucia's heart was beating erratically as she took advantage of the opportunity to pull her hand away. Dalen's finger landed in the air. There was still a warmth left on them. "Okay, let's go." When they were in the car, Lucia asked, "What do you want to eat?" "Whatever you want to eat," Dalen responded. "Fine. I'll treat you to a big meal," Lucia said, trying her best to sound excited. Although her dad didn't really care about her, he still gave her a monthly allowance for her living expenses. The so-called big meal was still much smaller than Dalen was used to, but it was a big indulgence for Lucia. Lucia had tried to choose a restaurant with a good ambiance. She knew if she were to treat Dalen to the kind of meals he was used to eating, she would go bankrupt. Lucia found themselves a corner booth and sat down. Dalen didn't say anything and just sat down opposite her. With his tall body and long legs, no matter where they were put, their knees were constantly brushing each other. Lucia went into the bathroom, took out her cell phone, and gave Macy the address of the restaurant. Macy, who was at home, happily grabbed her small bag and said goodbye to her family before getting into the driver's seat of her car. If Macy walked up to their booth without permission, she would definitely be stopped by Dalen's bodyguards. So Lucia had to pretend to bump into Macy outside the bathroom by chance. Lucia didn't want to be alone in the booth with Dalen, so she squatted on the toilet and played with her phone until Macy got there. Episode 46, Red with Embarrassment. Lucia was scrolling mindlessly on her phone when she heard someone come into the bathroom. The steps didn't sound like the crisp sound of a woman's high heels, but was instead as steady as the weight on her heart. The next thing she knew, someone knocked on the door of her stall. "There's someone in here," Lucia shouted, annoyed. The next second, the door was forced open, the lock breaking. Lucia watched in disbelief as a piece of metal from the lock fell at her feet. How much strength did it take to push open the door like that? Lucia raised her face angrily, but when she saw Dalen's sharp gaze, her anger turned into shock, then back to anger. "This is the female restroom," she shouted. "I thought you fell in." Dalen's black eyes shifted sharply and landed on Lucia's dress. "You don't take off your underwear when you go to the toilet?" Lucia knew she'd been found out, but she still tried to pull down her skirt. "Who said I didn't take off my underwear?" Dalen laughed. He came further into the stall and crouched down by her. Lucia's body tensed up, with fear but also with anticipation. The last time they were this close, they had been kissing. She looked at Dalen and asked anxiously, "What are you doing? This is the female restroom." "I know. I just wanted to check and see if you're telling the truth." Dalen's eyes were teasing, and Lucia realized what he was about to do. She hurried to hold down her skirt firmly. "Oh, no, you don't," she said. Lucia's face instantly turned red as Dalen's hand went to her knee and started nudging her hands aside. Lucia's mind went blank as Dalen gently moved his hand under her skirt. She let him. When Dalen's hand reached Lucia's hip, he ran the tip of his finger along the seam of her underwear. He smiled up at her. "It looks like you lied to me." Can a woman take a break? Lucia's voice barely managed to get words out. Her heart was beating so hard. Dalen pressed his hand against her hip. You don't like my company? He asked. Lucia didn't know what to say. All she could focus on was the fact that he was there, in the women's bathroom, and someone could walk in on them at any time. Let me go. I'm hungry, Lucia argued. Have you worked up an appetite in here? Dalen asked with a chuckle. What? No. Lucia's face flushed. Dalen let her go and left her stall, closing the door behind him for her to get composed. Lucia stood and smoothed her skirt. When Lucia opened the door of her stall, Dalen was waiting for her by the line of sinks. He was drying his hands slowly. Lucia rolled her eyes. Why couldn't he just wait for her in the booth? They left the restroom together, and before they could reach their booth, Lucia saw Macy enter the restaurant from afar. She waved her hand and shouted, Macy! Macy swung her head around and her eyes lit up. The two of them stepped forward and greeted each other as if they had coincidentally met. What are you doing here? Lucia asked. I heard that the dishes in this restaurant are pretty good, so I came to eat. I was planning to come with a friend, but they bailed on me, Macy said helplessly. Why not eat with us? Lucia immediately said. Is that okay? Macy pretended to be nervous and glanced at the tall figure that made her heart beat faster from time to time. Wait a moment. With that, Lucia went to Dalen, who was standing not far behind her. She can eat with us, right? It's fun to have one extra person anyway. The more the merrier. Lucia had a smile plastered on her face, but Dalen was suspicious. Dalen looked coldly at Macy and said in a low voice, You can join if you want. Then Lucia pulled Macy into the booth, placing her next to Dalen on the bench across from her. Originally, Lucia was sitting closest to Dalen. This way, the middle seat was separated by Macy, and Lucia immediately sat opposite Dalen. Lucia was proud of herself. She acted very well, as if she didn't know what she was doing. Dalen had been looking at Macy coldly since she sat down. In his dark eyes, there was an unfathomable chill and malice. I'm not bothering you, am I? Macy would look at Dalen with her loving eyes and ask every now and then. Nope, Dalen said. Of course, what he said didn't match what he was thinking. He tried to catch Lucia's gaze, but her eyes were lowered. After the dishes were served, Lucia tried to think of an excuse to leave. This was a perfect opportunity to catch Dalen cheating. Just as Lucia was admiring her plan, her body abruptly jerked and froze. She looked up in alarm at the two people across from her. Macy, who was still acting timid and shy, and Dalen, who had a deadpan expression on his face. A big foot grazed her leg and started climbing higher. This was definitely not something Macy would do. What was Dalen doing? They were in public. Lucia immediately closed her legs tightly, but Dalen was relentless. Dalen raised his face expressionlessly. His black eyes hid a hurricane of evil under the light. What's so exciting that your face is all turned red, Lucia? Dalen asked clearly, enjoying it all a little too much. Macy, who had been focusing on Dalen, finally noticed Lucia, whose face had an unusual blush, as if she was drunk. Have you been drinking? Why are you all red? Macy asked in a concerned tone. I'm fine. I'm just a little hot. It's normal for me to get hot during meals. Lucia forced a smile and said, if Macy wasn't here, she wouldn't have let Dalen mess with her so recklessly. But she couldn't move now, otherwise Macy would see through her. Episode 47. Why does he affect me? All Lucia could do was grit her teeth and endure it. She hoped that Dalen was only in a momentary mood and would cut it out soon. But Lucia had never had a guy do this to her, and she was intrigued. She opened her legs a little wider, and Dalen immediately took advantage of the opportunity. Lucia had underestimated Dalen's persistence. Ah! Lucia couldn't help but cry out as his foot reached higher. Macy was shocked. Are you okay? Macy asked. It would be weird if she was fine. Her whole body felt like it was on fire. However, Lucia still shook her head. I think I should go to the bathroom. She tried to get up, but she couldn't without giving away the fact that Dalen's foot was practically buried in her crotch. So Lucia stayed in her chair. Lucia looked at Dalen with a warning in her eyes, but there was also a sense of stubbornness and anger within them. She repeated, I need to go to the bathroom. He moved his foot higher, but above the table, Dalen still did not move an inch. He remained as calm as ever, not giving anything away. Lucia wanted to swear. Seeing that Lucia kept saying she wanted to go to the washroom but didn't move, Macy asked, Then why don't you go? Dalen still didn't retract his foot, and Lucia had to bite the back of her hand to stop a moan from escaping her. The longer Dalen kept at this, the more she wanted him to keep going. Lucia composed herself and said, I actually don't need to go anymore. Dalen, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. His voice filled the air with a low and intimidating tone. You can leave after you've eaten. Lucia thought he was talking about her and immediately said, I still need to finish. I wasn't talking to you. Lucia looked up and saw he was addressing Macy. The expression on Macy's face was extremely awkward. She forced a smile. She felt too embarrassed and unwanted in the situation. At least she was good with picking up hints. Macy didn't dare to say that she hadn't eaten her fill. She picked up her bag and said, I'm all finished. I'll leave you two to finish up. After that, she left the booth. Lucia let out a loud moan as soon as Macy was out of earshot. She pressed the palms of her hands against the table and spread her legs wider, but that's finally when Dalen moved his foot back. That's all with my feet. Imagine if I used my hands, Dalen asked shamelessly. Lucia did her best to calm her breathing and awkwardly waved off the other customers who were staring at her with concerned expressions. That was too far, Dalen. You didn't even stop to eat. Since Macy wasn't here, Lucia was no longer hiding her emotions. Her eyes, that were more desire than threat, stared at Dalen. Dalen's expression changed. His dark eyes pierced her soul. You know you liked it. Lucia's face turned more red than she imagined was possible. It was like being in a world of ice and fire. Dalen took a fork and stabbed his food, lifting it slowly to his mouth. It was insanely seductive. Want a bite? He asked. Lucia shook her head. Ever since she got to know Dalen, her mind and body hardly knew what to do when he said and did things like this. Encountering Dalen's cold and forceful eyes, Lucia said innocently, I just need to go to the washroom. Don't ever try to play this trick on me again. Dalen leaned back his body. His sharp eyes shot towards Lucia's face. Lucia's body had relaxed, but her heart was still tense. She swallowed and said, What is that supposed to mean? Dalen didn't reply to her question. He merely threw out a sentence in a cold tone. If it happens again, I'll have to seriously reconsider the 3-month deadline. His face was calm without any ripples, but it was as if a 1,000-pound stone had been thrown over, crushing Lucia's fragile heart. Anger clouded her thoughts, and she raised her foot under the table and tried to slam it into Dalen's crotch. However, her leg was too short, and she ended up kicking his thigh. Lucia's face flushed in anger. Your legs are too short. Dalen laughed. Lucia gritted her teeth. At least she had managed to make him laugh, and the tension dissipated slightly. The next day, Lucia returned to school very distracted. Macy kept calling and texting her ever since she'd left their planned date, but Lucia acted as if she didn't notice. She already knew why Macy was calling. Lucia was still trying to think of a way to use Macy to frame Dalen. Even if Dalen fell in love with Macy, at least Lucia would be free. She hated to admit it, though, that the thought of Dalen in love with Macy was disturbing. Her plan had failed the other day. Dalen's sharp eyes had seen through Lucia's plans. even if he didn't say it explicitly. Lucia wasn't that stupid. "Hey, what are you doing here? Come with me to cool off." Cole ran over with his face covered in sweat. "Where to?" she asked. "The swimming pool." They walked to the pool together, and after changing into the swimsuit, Lucia jumped into the water. She imagined she was a mermaid as she swam laps under the water. Lucia was even more beautiful and graceful in the water, a natural beauty. After swimming for a while, Cole got out and rested by the pool. "You know, Lucia, you really are beautiful," Cole said casually. "Dalen is a lucky guy." Lucia's heart tightened, and her face flushed when she thought about what happened in the restaurant yesterday. If she wasn't in the water, her whole body would have turned red. She didn't want to think about it. "You're unusually quiet. Is there something on your mind?" Cole asked. "I tried to set up Dalen and Macy yesterday," Lucia admitted. Cole was interested. "Did it work?" "No," said Lucia. "Dalen saw right through me." "Oof, that couldn't have ended well," said Cole. Lucia nodded her head without a shred of hesitation. "Is that your only option to get out? I mean, this isn't just a relationship between a man and a woman, it's a marriage. It can't be undone so easily," Cole reasoned. "I don't know what I did to deserve torture like this," Lucia cried. "Don't you have a saying? As long as you're here, you can rest easy. Just be in the moment and enjoy it while it lasts," said Cole, as he laid back in a pool chair and folded his hands behind his head. Lucia muttered to herself. She also wanted to be at peace with herself, but she only had 3 months. Lucia couldn't help but tremble at the thought of what would happen then. Raising her head to the sky, Lucia let out a long groan. She didn't want to be married. She wanted a chance to live. Macy had called Lucia so many times and sent so many messages, yet Lucia still hadn't replied. She was so angry that she slammed her cell phone. After secretly following Lucia for 2 days, Macy had finally found out that Lucia still lived in Dalen's mansion. Episode 48. Lucia did something mischievous. The more Macy thought about it, the more she felt that she had fallen into Lucia's trap. She thought about how weird Lucia was acting at their lunch the other day. However, it was already too late for her to bring up the fact that something was weird. Lucia might be ridiculing her behind her back. There was a burning rage in her heart. How dare Lucia tease her like this? Since there were no classes in the afternoon, Lucia went back to the mansion after lunch. Dalen was definitely not at home. Lucia played with her phone in her room for a while before deciding to take a nap. When she woke up, she felt a little hungry, so she decided to go down to the kitchen to find something to eat. However, on her way downstairs, she saw Jeff, who had just entered the hall. Jeff looked at her with a cold gaze. He didn't seem to be in a good mood as he merely glanced at Lucia's face and then shifted his attention elsewhere. Spencer immediately went up to welcome him. "Mr. Jeff, you're here. I'm sorry, but Mr. Patrick is not home at the moment." "So I'm not welcome if he's not here?" Jeff asked, looking at Spencer coldly. Spencer immediately lowered his head even more. "Of course you are. I'll pour you some tea right now." Jeff was bullying others as soon as he came in. Lucia liked Spencer and John quite a bit, so she was angry at Jeff for treating Spencer like that. Lucia turned around and walked towards the tea house. She didn't want to talk to Jeff. But when John saw her walking past, he asked, "Where are you going, madame?" "I'm hungry. I thought I'll just quickly check the kitchen to find something to eat." "Oh, you don't have to worry, ma'am. I'll fix something up for you to eat," John replied courteously. "I'll tag along," Lucia said, hatching a devious plan in her head. Lucia stood in front of the azure stone countertop in the kitchen and saw all kinds of tea-making tools and materials placed on it. When Spencer finished mixing the tea and turned around, Lucia quickly poured sour lemon juice into Jeff's cup. Then she put her finger in and spat twice in the cup. "Are you okay, miss?" Spencer asked, turning back around. "I'm fine." Lucia smiled innocently. Spencer carried the tea out without noticing anything. Lucia sat down on the edge of the counter, swinging her legs proudly in the air. After Jean brought the food over, she put it into her mouth and carried the rest out as she watched Jeff. She had the satisfaction of having done something bad. Spencer handed Jeff his cup of tea. "You're dismissed," Jeff commanded Spencer without a word of thanks. Spencer put down the cup and retreated to the corner where he could be instructed at any time. Jeff slid his hand a few times on the screen of his phone. Then he picked up the cup of tea in front of him, looked at his phone, and took a sip. The liquid slid past his lips and he swallowed it. Jeff's gaze darkened a little as he looked away from the screen. It landed on the teacup. After a moment, he said, "Interesting," and took another sip. Lucia couldn't help but chuckle before she retreated back to her room. A little while later, when Lucia came out, Jeff was no longer there. She inquired Spencer about Jeff. "Where's Jeff?" "He's gone." "Did he drink that cup of tea?" "Half." Lucia could hardly contain her giggle. Jeff drank the tea she spat in. The next day, Lucia was leaving from school as she saw someone she didn't expect to see. She still hadn't answered Macy's texts, so when she saw Macy waiting for her, she turned around and walked the other way. "Lucia!" Macy chased after her. Lucia gritted her teeth and could only turn around. With a surprised expression, she asked, "Why are you here?" "You didn't answer my calls and texts. I was worried that something might have happened to you, so I came to see you," Macy replied. Episode 49, Catfight. "If you have something to say, just say it," Lucia said, straight to the point. She wasn't in a very patient mood. In any case, Macy was of no use. Lucia gave her a golden opportunity and she had let it pass her by. She didn't feel any guilt towards Macy. "It was just that the last time I ate with you guys, I didn't upset Dalen in any way, did I?" "I left without saying anything because I was nervous," Macy said shyly. Lucia let out a long sigh. "Macy, you really like Dalen, don't you?" Macy also felt that her patience had reached its limit after she had been asked this question. Anyway, it wasn't just a day or two with Lucia. The conflict between them was as wide as a river, so no matter what, it couldn't be fixed. She said, "Yes, I do like him. I like him very much. Way more than you do, apparently. Why are you by his side and not me?" Lucia rolled her eyes. "But I already gave you a chance. Are you still blaming me if it didn't work out?" When Macy heard Lucia's words, the anger in her heart almost burned to the top of her head. Lucia looked at Macy's restored, vicious face, all pretext of kindness gone. Although she didn't feel awkward anymore, she didn't want to waste time talking to her. This is why Lucia had always been unable to get on good terms with Barbara and her daughter. No matter what you do, people always think it's a scheme. Although this time she did scheme, but all in Macy's favor, to say the least. Despite her failed attempt at trying to get Macy closer to Dalen for her own good, Lucia still couldn't bear to be around Macy for too long. She couldn't be bothered to waste her time with her anymore. She had to go back now. Lucia walked past Macy and went to the intersection to stop a taxi. Macy was so angry that her face turned bright red and a fire started burning in her heart. In the next second, she reached out her hand and pushed Lucia into the street. "Ah!" Lucia fell forward, unprepared. How could she have known that Macy was so crazy? It was impossible to guard against her. She fell in an instant, but everything looked like it was all happening in slow motion in her mind. She saw the cars on the road speeding towards her. Lucia closed her eyes tightly. The sound of the tires screeching against the ground exploded in her ears. Lucia's body tightened up and her head hit the ground. Her thoughts abruptly scattered and a wave of dizziness followed. Lucia lay on the ground. The weak sunlight was extremely glaring, and even opening her eyes was painful. The world felt like it was spinning. She reached up to hold her head to try and stop the dizziness. but it didn't help. She even felt the wetness on her hands and the strong smell of blood. Macy snapped out of her daze when she saw the blood. She didn't want to kill Lucia after all, especially so blatantly. Would she go to jail? "Are you okay?" The driver who had hit her ran around the car and knelt by Lucia. Lucia, who had just recovered from her dizziness, sat up and pointed at Macy, who was still staring blankly at them. The driver immediately said, "Why aren't you coming to take her to the hospital? I saw you pushing her." Lucia didn't want Macy to be the one to take her to the hospital. She was so angry at Macy she could have punched her, but she couldn't argue because her head hurt so bad. Macy accompanied the driver to take Lucia to the hospital. On examination, it was a mild concussion, not a serious one, and a shallow head wound. The wound on her forehead was bandaged, and her face was still pale under the white gauze. She leaned back on the bed, not wanting to open her eyes. "Lucia, don't play dead. If I really wanted you to be hit by a car, I would have made sure that you were hit by a car. So stop making me look like the bad guy here," Macy said, giving up her veil of being the ideal sister. Lucia was confused. She definitely remembered Macy pushing her. But Lucia decided not to argue with her anymore as she felt her head throbbing. Seeing that Lucia did not make a sound, Macy thought that she had really fallen asleep. But Lucia was still watching her through her eyelashes. She saw that Macy was slowly approaching the ring on her finger and was about to take it off. Lucia gathered her strength and kicked out with all her might. "Ah!" Macy cried as she fell back, holding her stomach. At that same time, the door to Lucia's hospital room was pushed open. Dalen appeared in front of her, anger and worry emanating off of him in waves. His cold face immediately turned gloomy when he saw Lucia's current appearance. When Lucia saw Dalen, she immediately withdrew her foot. Then, with a pained expression, she hugged her head and groaned as she leaned against the pillow. Dalen's expression changed. "Call a doctor." He took Lucia in his arms and held her against his strong arms. Lucia leaned her head on Dalen's broad chest. The doctor rushed over, examined Lucia again, and told her not to move her head so much. After the doctor left, Macy felt that Lucia was obviously acting. How could Dalen not tell? After being examined, Lucia didn't want to be supported by Dalen, so she leaned back against the bed. Dalen saw that she was not looking well, and his expressions were cold and gloomy. He turned to Macy and asked, "What was going on?" "I just wanted to help Lucia out of kindness, but she didn't know what was good for her, so she kicked me in the stomach. That's when you walked in," Macy complained, rubbing her waist pitifully. When Dalen turned his gaze to Lucia, she simply said, "Macy pushed me into the street and I was hit by a car." "I did not," Macy screeched. "How can I push you? You're my family. I would never do that." Macy had already used money to buy off the driver, and there were no other witnesses. Upon hearing Macy's words, Lucia lost her composure and practically bounced up from the bed. "Macy, you—" "Whoa, no need to get excited. Lie still." Dalen's rough voice echoed in every corner of the room, making both girls freeze. Lucia laid there obediently with a stubborn look on her face as she bit her lips. Seeing Dalen get mad at Lucia made Macy's heart full of joy, but it was just an illusion. The next words that came out of her mouth were as gentle as water. "Mr. Patrick, I really didn't push Lucia. She's always had it out for me, ever since our parents married." If it weren't for the fact that she couldn't move, Lucia would have jumped up and kicked Macy again. This kind of sham behavior was typical with Macy, and Lucia already knew that everyone was going to believe her lies. Episode 50, The Healing Kiss. Did Macy really bully you when you lived with your family? Dalen asked Lucia with a serious expression. Lucia was stunned. Did Dalen also believe Macy before he believed her? Lucia fumed. Yes. Then why is she still alive and well? Dalen asked. Lucia looked at Dalen's cold and unfeeling face in surprise. On the other side of the room, the gloating smile on Macy's face froze. Then she heard Dalen order sternly, "Men, take this woman out of the room and report her to the authorities." She pushed Lucia into the road, causing her serious harm. Without saying anything, Spencer waved his hand and the two bodyguards came in and dragged Macy out. But before they got her out of the room, Dalen spun around and slapped her in the face. "What are you doing? What do you want? I didn't do anything. Let me go!" The sound of Macy struggling grew further and further away. While Lucia was still stunned by the sounds Macy made while being taken away, Dalen sat on the edge of the bed. His heavy body made the bed creak. He spoke calmly. "Are you feeling comfortable now?" Lucia didn't answer and just stared at him with disbelief. Dalen rubbed the back of her hand with his thumb and laughed. "Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not going to kill her. Just going to teach her a lesson for hurting my wife." The tension grew thick around her, making it hard for her to breathe. For a moment there, Lucia wasn't able to make up her mind whether she should worry about Macy or how her heart skipped a beat when Dalen called her his wife so dearly. Lucia was speechless. However, she knew what Dalen said was true. Lucia could only imagine how miserable Macy was, but she deserved it. Lucia hadn't expected Macy to be so vicious that she'd actually push her into the street like that. If the driver hadn't braked on time, she would have died. Lucia could only hope that a trip to the police station would teach her a lesson this time. She just didn't know if Macy would complain to their dad, and if she did, who would her dad believe? Lucia felt depressed when she thought of her dad, but her jaw tightened as she came back to her senses and met Dalen's deep and cold eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. His gaze was like a sharp arrow that was about to pierce into her soul. "Nothing," she whispered. "You are my woman. If someone tries to hurt you, they'll have to deal with me." Dalen's dark eyes were filled with anger. Lucia felt goosebumps all over her body. After sitting in silence for a while, Lucia felt her eyes get heavy. She'd been through a lot, and she was exhausted. She fell asleep not long after. It was dark when she woke up, but Dalen's tall figure was still in the room. "Why are you here again?" Lucia had just woken up and her voice was soft and scratchy. Dalen examined Lucia's face with concern. He didn't answer her question but said, "Eat something." Only then did Lucia felt that her stomach was growling with hunger. She was adequately distracted and forgot about asking Dalen when and why he'd returned. But in reality, Dalen never left. Lucia was sleeping soundly. She didn't notice Dalen watching her the entire time, making sure that she was okay. Spencer brought some food in and laid it on Lucia's side table. When Lucia saw Dalen pick up a spoon to eat with her, she knew that he hadn't eaten yet either. But she still didn't ask why. Dalen, even after all he'd done for her, still felt unapproachable. Lucia examined the food, moving pieces of the soup around with her spoon. Dalen scooped a spoonful of ginger into her bowl. Lucia immediately told him, "I don't eat ginger," and started to pick out the pieces. "You need to. Ginger is good for healing," Dalen argued. Lucia spooned the food in her mouth, carefully avoiding the clump of ginger. Was there any limit to how controlling Dalen could be? He even had to have a say in what she ate. Lucia used her spoon to poke at the ginger and finally stirred it into the soup. Dalen's gaze went to her bowl. Lucia spooned the soup with the ginger into her mouth and carefully chewed and swallowed. To her surprise, the ginger actually brought out the flavor in the soup. She took another spoonful. After Lucia swallowed it, she opened her mouth and stuck out her tongue to tease Dalen and prove that she'd eaten it. Her pink lips wrapped around her tongue. This unintentional action looked so cute that it stirred something in Dalen's heart. Lucia noticed Dalen's reaction and noticed his Adam's apple slid up and down as he swallowed hard. He put down the spoon in his hand and Lucia closed her mouth. The tension in the air was back, and Dalen was leaning forward. By the time Lucia processed what was happening, Dalen's mouth was on hers. She parted her mouth in response and felt the tip of Dalen's tongue explore her mouth. Lucia was stunned. her body buzzing in response to this gentle kiss. Their breathing quickened as Dalen leaned into her and Lucia clutched the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. Dalen didn't kiss her for long, as he was afraid that he'd hurt her while she was in such a delicate state. He pulled back so their faces were just a few millimeters apart. I never really learned how to kiss. Did you? I think I still need more practice, Dalen said in a soft, teasing voice. Lucia, who was still gasping for air, responded, Well, if you're not satisfied, you can go find someone else. Even though she knew he was teasing, she still felt self-conscious. What kind of person would kiss her like that and then give her critique? But she did let him kiss her, didn't she? Don't worry, Lucia. I can teach you. Dalen's eyes sparkling as his gaze traveled around her face, as if trying to memorize every freckle. Lucia's face turned red with embarrassment. I don't need it, she argued, even though she knew that she probably did. Dalen gazed at her with a calm and humorous expression, making Lucia feel that she had nowhere to hide. She lowered her head and continued to eat without looking at him. After a while, more ginger appeared in her bowl. Lucia looked up and gave Dalen a small smile. When Lucia woke up the next morning, Dalen still hadn't left. In fact, the whole time she was there, she never saw him leave. Everyone always said that Dalen was heartless and unfeeling. But then why would he stay? Lucia was starting to suspect that perhaps she had misjudged Dalen, but she was still careful with her heart. Dalen could change moods in an instant, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. Lucia was sure that this would be the night he would finally leave. Right?